Hello, everyone. Oh my, it is such a delight to see you all here today. Welcome to our show, Background Interview, where we invite some of the most remarkable figures in history and have illuminating discussions about their lives and wisdom. I am Lily, your friendly and casual host, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Whether you are commuting, doing housework, or immersing yourself in some other task, I hope you will enjoy this program as a fascinating form of audio entertainment. Our goal is to enrich your mind and spark your curiosity, even if you are listening with half an ear. Now, let us jump right in and have some fun today. Lately, I have been having the strangest dreams. I dream that I am standing in a field of giant togas. Yes, togas everywhere. One toga tries to sell me a ticket to a musical titled The Symposium, while another toga is offering me half a loaf of bread in return for philosophical musings. And you know what is absolutely hilarious? The togas started debating whether the bread was truly real or just a figment of my imagination. Oh my, those dreams sure make my mornings feel odd, but hey, it keeps life interesting. Enough of my toga tales, though. Today, I have a truly special guest to introduce. My friends, let us give a huge round of applause to one of the most influential philosophers in Western history, a man who needs no introduction but is about to get one anyway. Please welcome him warmly.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose you might recognize me from your philosophy classes. I am quite honored to be here with all of you today. Though I admit, in my own time, we did not have such technology, and here I am now, addressing a modern audience. It is quite extraordinary.
Thank you for coming, Socrates. Let us both take a seat now so we can settle in for a lovely conversation.
Indeed, let us do so. I suppose it is for the best if I rest these old bones.
So, Socrates, now that you are seated and ready to speak, could you give our audience a bit of an introduction of who you are, in your own words? You are so well known for your philosophies, but many might want to hear you describe yourself directly.
Certainly, I am Socrates, an Athenian by birth, often called a father of Western philosophy. My life was spent examining myself and others, attempting to clarify the nature of virtue, wisdom, and goodness. I was, in my time, a rather stubborn and inquisitive sort of fellow. I served in the Athenian military, questioned many of my city's beliefs, and believed wholeheartedly in the value of questioning. My dialogues with my followers, most famously documented by my student Plato, became something of a hallmark. I was tried by my fellow Athenians, found guilty of corrupting youth and impiety, and sentenced to death. Even so, I maintained my convictions to the end. That is the gist of who I am, I suppose.
Wonderful introduction, Socrates. And let me just share with our audience an interesting tidbit. Did you know that some people say Socrates had a rather unkempt appearance and was known for going about barefoot in the streets of Athens?
Indeed, that is often said. Some considered me quite the sight. Why bother with fancy shoes if the earth itself is free and welcoming beneath your feet?
Oh my, indeed, that is quite the perspective. Let us keep the spirit of curiosity and humility flowing. Now, dear listeners, we have a wealth of topics to discuss. Let us dive deeply into Socrates' upbringing, his family, the life experiences that shaped him, and of course, the philosophies for which he is so revered. Trust me, you will not want to miss any of this. I would like to begin with your childhood and family background, Socrates. Would you mind telling us about your parents and any early influences you had?
Certainly. My father was a stonecutter by the name of Socrates, a humble man who worked with his hands and served as a quiet role model for me. My mother, Phenerete, was a midwife. I often credit her profession with influencing my philosophical approach, which I have occasionally referred to as intellectual midwifery. She helped bring new life into the world, and in a sense, my method aimed to bring forth ideas from another's mind. From an early age, I was impressed by the notion that truths could be coaxed out. One does not simply impose them, but rather helps people discover wisdom that resides within, or at least push them to realize what they do not truly know.
Fascinating. And as you grew older, what would you say were some turning points in your life? Maybe certain experiences, challenges, or failures that helped shape the man you would become?
There were many, Lily. However, one that stands out was the Delphic oracle's proclamation. One of my friends asked the oracle at Delphi if there were any man wiser than Socrates. The priestess answered that there was none. When I heard this, I was rather perplexed. You see, I did not think myself wise at all. That set me on a quest to find someone wiser than I questioned poets, statesmen, craftsmen, and discovered that while many believed themselves to know quite a lot, they often lacked fundamental insight. Eventually, I realized that, in a paradoxical way, my awareness of my own ignorance was a sort of wisdom. That was one crucial turning point, as it led me to my fundamental stance of knowing that I know nothing, which is often oversimplified into that phrase but is truly about recognizing the limits of one's knowledge.
I see. That recognition of ignorance and the determination to question absolutely everything that you took for granted. That is so central to what we now know as the Socratic method. Were there any particular philosophers or other individuals who influenced you? Maybe older thinkers whose works you admired?
Well, I had great respect for many older traditions, including the teachings of those who studied nature and the cosmos, like Anaxagoras. I was also intrigued by the mystical utterances of the Pythagoreans. However, more than any direct philosopher's influence, it was the recognition of how misguided many so-called wise men were that truly moved me forward. I was spurred to ask questions relentlessly, all the while suspecting that I might be a fool, yet hoping to find at least some glimmer of truth.
One question so many listeners likely have is, why philosophy? Of all the pursuits in Athens, why dedicate your life to this path of questioning, logic, and morality rather than, say, politics or commerce?
It is a fine question, Lily. I realized that without clarity about what virtue, justice, and the good truly were, all other endeavors were, in some way, built on shaky foundations. Politics without true knowledge is just vain ambition. Commerce without virtue can be an instrument of greed. It seemed to me that the care of one's soul, the pursuit of wisdom and moral excellence, was the highest calling. In that sense, I never saw myself as removing myself from politics or daily life. Rather, I was examining the moral grounds upon which we base our everyday decisions. It is the greatest need of a city, that its citizens should know how to live justly. But to do that, one must know what justice is. That is never a trivial question.
Absolutely. And that search for justice eventually led you into conflict with certain figures in Athens, correct? For instance, how did you view the sophists, who were teaching rhetoric and persuasion, in some sense a form of subtle manipulation?
The sophists were skilled speakers and, in my view, rather cunning teachers who often served wealthy families by teaching their children the arts of persuasion for the sake of advantage. They were paid well for this. I have no quarrel with earning a living, but I believed it was dangerous to treat virtue as though it were a product to be sold or a rhetorical trick. True wisdom should aim at the good, not mere victory in argument. The sophists were, I suppose, quite influential, but their approach to knowledge and truth seemed to me rather superficial. They often taught how to make the weaker argument appear the stronger, something that, to my mind, was at odds with real pursuit of truth.
That is an interesting distinction. Let us delve deeper into your idea of knowing that you know nothing, which we have come to see as a hallmark of your philosophy. Why did you stress that so much, and how does it tie into your concept of a philosophical life?
I stressed it because it is honest. All too often, humans pretend to certain knowledge because we fear the uncertainty of ignorance. We cannot bear to confess we simply do not know. But if you do not know your own limits, how will you ever learn? By starting from the admission, I do not know, we open ourselves up. We become receptive to true wisdom and realize that knowledge is an ongoing quest. It ties into a philosophical life in that it fosters humility, curiosity, and an openness to question assumptions at their root. If you cling to illusions of knowledge, you might never inquire. That, to me, is disastrous for any society hoping to cultivate virtue.
Very powerful. You also famously stressed the notion of soul care, or tending to the soul. Could you expand on that for our audience? What does it mean to care for the soul, and how is that reflected in a truly examined life?
Caring for the soul is about seeking to cultivate virtue, justice, courage, moderation, wisdom, rather than chasing external rewards of wealth, power, or prestige. The soul is the seat of moral and intellectual character. If one neglects that seat, if one doesn't examine whether they are acting justly or living well, life becomes empty. Yes, you might amass gold, but what good is that if you are corrupt or ignorant? An examined life is one in which you care for your moral being as diligently as an athlete trains his body, or as a farmer tends his fields. That is the core of my notion of soul care.
Makes a lot of sense, especially in today's world, where people can sometimes get caught up in material pursuits or social status. Shifting gears a bit, you lived through a tumultuous time in Athens. There was war, shifting political power, and you were known for your somewhat rebellious spirit. How did you see your role as a citizen of Athens?
I believed it was the duty of a citizen to question wrongdoing, even if that wrongdoing came from the city itself. A city thrives when its citizens hold it to the highest ethical standards. That is how we progress toward justice. This, of course, did not make me popular with all. Yet, I maintained that it was better to face disapproval or punishment than to remain silent and thus complicit in injustice.
Indeed, your trial is one of history's most famed events. Could you talk a bit about what led up to that and how you perceive the charges against you of corrupting the youth and failing to acknowledge the gods of the city?
The immediate charges were those, yes. However, in truth, I believe the deeper cause was political and cultural. Many had grown exasperated with me, as I questioned the beliefs of powerful figures and, in their view, embarrassed them. After decades of turbulence in Athens, there was a desire to restore a certain sense of normalcy. My habit of stirring up questions was seen as dangerous. The accusations were, in my view, misguided. I did not teach the young to become unruly. I simply conversed with them. If some discovered that their elders' wisdom was hollow, that is not necessarily my doing. As for the gods, my position was also misunderstood. I did not deny the gods, but I was not interested in shallow superstition either.
When the death sentence was pronounced, how did you come to terms with that? Many people, reading the accounts, are struck by your calm acceptance of the verdict.
By that time, I was not young. I had lived consistently with my beliefs for decades. To flee or betray them would have undone everything I stood for. Death was, to me, not the greatest evil. A life lived without virtue or truthfulness is far worse. So, I chose to abide by Athens's laws, even if I believed the verdict to be unjust. We are part of the city, we do not live in isolation. So I submitted to the sentence and drank the hemlock. I prefer to think that my convictions, which had guided me all my life, were worth preserving, even in the face of that penalty.
That is an incredible stance. It also highlights the difference between your approach and that of the sophists, who might well have manipulated or fled to preserve their standing. Finally, looking back on your life, though I know your life ended centuries ago, what do you consider your greatest achievements, and what message would you impart to a modern audience who may be hearing from you for the first time?
My achievements, if you can call them that, lie in encouraging people to ask questions. I never wrote any treatises. The dialogues that remain are largely from Plato. My real legacy, if it exists, is in the awakened minds of those who realize that dogmatic certainties can blind you. My message to the modern audience: question. Question your leaders, your beliefs, your assumptions, your habits. Seek knowledge, knowing that you will never have perfect knowledge, but that the very search draws you closer to wisdom. Indeed, that is the greatest good for a human being.
Oh my, that is such a profound perspective, Socrates. I hope everyone listening feels at least a bit more curious and reflective. Now, I want to engage our live audience here. Did anything in Socrates' story or philosophy surprise you? I see a lot of pensive expressions. It is that moment of pondering. Let us move along to our next segment, the mailbag portion of the show, where we read questions we have received from listeners all over the world. Our first question today comes from Irene, who lives in Chicago. She writes, Socrates, how do you think your idea of self-examination would apply in our modern digital age, where we are constantly distracted by social media and endless streams of information?
I suppose the principle remains the same. If distractions abound, then we must be even more deliberate in setting aside time to reflect. Perhaps you might limit the hours spent scrolling through idle chatter. Instead, use some time each day to question whether you have grown in virtue, knowledge, or understanding. Ask yourself, is this content enlightening or merely passing the time? In a sense, your environment is different, but human nature remains the same, so the pursuit of wisdom and the fight against ignorance must continue, albeit amidst new technologies.
Thank you for that thoughtful answer, Socrates. Our next question comes from Daniel in Melbourne, who writes, could you offer some guidance for those of us dealing with major life decisions, such as changing careers, raising families, or coping with personal failures? How can your teachings help us find the right path?
At the core, it is a question of knowing yourself and examining the values you hold dearest. It is easy to be swept along by others' expectations. Instead, ask, will this path lead me toward greater virtue, or is it merely a pursuit of wealth or prestige at the cost of my character? Also, acknowledge that mistakes are part of the human experience. The greatest error, in my view, is not to err, but to refuse to learn from one's errors. A life oriented around thoughtful reflection stands a better chance of remaining in harmony with one's deeper moral convictions.
Another pearl of wisdom, indeed. Our next question comes from Maria in Lisbon. She wants to know, Socrates, how can we cultivate the habit of dialoguing with others respectfully, when many modern discussions seem to be about shouting and proving the other side wrong?
I sympathize, for even in my own time, debate could grow heated. True dialogue requires genuine listening, a willingness to adopt a position of uncertainty, and an honest pursuit of truth. If you enter a conversation merely to defeat your opponent, you have already lost sight of wisdom. Perhaps you might practice listening first, acknowledging the valid points of the other, and then gently probing for areas that require clarification or challenge. This fosters mutual respect and paves the way for a deeper understanding, rather than a mere exchange of insults.
Excellent. Now, let us see. Folks in the audience, do you have any questions you would like to pose to Socrates? Yes, you there in the fourth row. Let me come on down to you. I will just step off this stage now. Off I go. Everyone watch your toes. I am making my way through. Let me add a bit of flair as I head over. So, has anyone dropped a philosopher's stone around here? Because I am definitely moving in search of some deeper wisdom, or maybe a snack. Hello, my friend. What is your name? Wonderful to meet you. I heard you say your name is Kevin. So Kevin, what would you like to ask our venerable guest? Oh my, that is quite a question, Kevin. Let me just relay that to Socrates. Socrates, Kevin here wonders if you believe the soul persists in some form after death, and if so, how that influenced your attitude about risking your life for the sake of truth.
I would say that I believed, and indeed many Athenians believed, in some measure of the soul's immortality. That contributed to my lack of fear about death, for I did not see death as an end, but perhaps as a transition. But more so than that, it was the conviction that a life of justice and truth is the only life worth living, whether or not the soul endures. When you hold that conviction, your fear of death lessens because you realize that betrayal of truth is worse than the grave.
I see. Thank you, Socrates. And thank you, Kevin, for your thoughtful question. Does anyone else have a question? Yes, you, sir, in the back. Let me just shuffle my way there. I am traversing the audience like a curious Greek philosopher crossing the Athenian agora in search of a debate partner. Hello, sir. What is your name? I heard you say your name is Jonathan. So wonderful to meet you, Jonathan. What question can I pass along to Socrates on your behalf? That is truly intriguing. Let me just share this with Socrates. Socrates, Jonathan here is asking about how you handled personal relationships, such as with your wife, Xanthippe, and whether your dedication to philosophy created friction in your daily life.
I have to laugh a bit at that question, for indeed, my devotion to dialogue and my disregard for material comforts could appear troublesome. Xanthippe was known to be a strong-willed partner. We had quarrels, but I respected her spirit. She kept me grounded. In many ways, living with someone who questions you at home is not too different from the marketplace. She reminded me that philosophy could not be an excuse for neglecting practical matters. It was a challenging balance, but an instructive one.
Indeed, relationships can be the ultimate test of one's philosophy. Anyone else? Perhaps one last question for the moment. Yes, you, in the corner. Alright, this will be the last question, so let me come on over, weaving through the crowd as quickly as I can. Watch out, folks, Lily is on the move again, dancing through the audience. Maybe I should do a comedic jig to keep the mood light. Here we are. Hello, what is your name? I heard that your name is Alicia. So lovely to meet you, Alicia. What is your question for Socrates? That is quite an interesting angle, Alicia. Let me relay it now. Socrates, Alicia asks if you could visit modern times. Would you engage with online forums or social media debates? Or would you consider them unproductive?
I imagine I would still engage, because wherever there are minds to be stimulated and illusions to be questioned, that is where a conversation might take place. However, I would caution that online discourse too often lacks nuance, especially if one tries to compress complex arguments into fleeting messages. Still, if used wisely, it might be a powerful tool to reach many people. The key, as always, is to keep sincerity and respect at the forefront, rather than succumbing to the game of hurling insults.
Well, that is a brilliant perspective. Thank you, Alicia, and thanks to all of you for your questions. Now let us return to the stage.
Thank you, all. Your questions are quite insightful.
I do appreciate the audience's engagement. Everyone is so curious. Listeners, which question touched you the most out of these? I see thoughtful faces all around. As for me, I have a few questions of my own, Socrates. Let me start with something a bit random. If someone approached you and asked how to balance ambition and humility, how would you advise them?
I would say that humility is not the opposite of ambition. One can certainly pursue great endeavors while still acknowledging the limits of one's knowledge and abilities. The key is to be driven by a thirst for excellence without falling into arrogance. Continually question yourself, why am I striving for this? Is it for a shallow reason such as fame, or does it truly serve the good? Keep that question alive, and you balance ambition with humility.
Nicely put. Let me ask something else that popped into my head just now. If you could transform modern education, how would you restructure it?
I would reduce rote memorization in favor of collaborative inquiry, dialogues, and genuine debate. Let students discover truths by exploring them together. Encourage them to question teachers and established doctrines. Of course, one must have certain foundations of knowledge, but the real spark of education is lit when students realize they can push beyond memorization and become co-creators of understanding.
I love that vision. Now, how about we shift to something a bit more playful? I propose a quick quiz for the audience, focusing on Socrates himself. What say you?
I am at your service, Lily. Ask away.
Wonderful. Then let us jump right into our quiz corner. Let us test the audience. Here is the first question. It is widely known that Socrates had unusual habits. Which one of these do you think is more likely? Did Socrates frequently stand motionless, deep in thought for hours on end, or did he practice daily sprints around the city walls in search of physical excellence? Show me a sign. If you think Socrates stood motionless, show a rock with your hand. If you think he ran sprints, show a paper with your hand. Observing the audience from here, it looks like slightly more people are showing rock. Socrates, enlighten them, please.
Indeed, I was known to pause and think for long stretches, sometimes quite still. Physical exercise is fine, but my daily practice was more about training the mind than running sprints.
Congratulations to everyone holding rock. Next, we have another question about Socrates' personal life. Did Socrates once claim that the unexamined life is not worth living, or did he assert that all life is equally valuable, so do not worry about reflection? Show me your sign again. Rock, if you think he said the unexamined life is not worth living. Paper, if you think he believed all life was equally valuable without reflection. A sea of rock out there. Socrates?
Indeed, it is a core tenet of my philosophy that the unexamined life is not worth living. I never advocated ignoring reflection, so those who chose rock are correct once more.
Great job, everyone. Thank you for participating. And thank you, Socrates, for clarifying. Let us move toward a bit of a wrap-up. We have explored so much: your early life, your influences, your notion of justice, your differences with the sophists, your trial, your acceptance of the death sentence, and your unwavering commitment to truth. Do you have any last words for our audience?
Reflect on your actions, question assumptions, and remain open-minded. The path to wisdom is never complete. Continue forward, and do not be afraid to confront ignorance, especially your own. In that pursuit lies the nurturing of the soul.
Let us take a moment, dear audience, to glance back over all that has been said. Socrates, your insights are invaluable. I feel like we have traveled centuries back in time and returned with a treasure chest of reflection.
I am pleased if anything I have shared proves useful.
We are so grateful you could come and join us on Background Interview. Thank you, Socrates, for your thoughtful responses.
I thank you, Lily, and I thank this audience for hearing me. May we continue to seek knowledge always.
Thank you again for your generosity. Take care, Socrates. We will let you depart now in your own way.
Farewell, everyone. I suppose I must wander on to whatever awaits next. May your days be filled with philosophical wonder.
And there he goes, folks. Amazing. Thank you to all of you in the audience, and everyone out there listening while doing your tasks or commuting. Your presence makes this show possible. Now, listeners, what part of today's interview resonated with you the most? I hope you found something memorable to ponder. Next, let us move on to our famous quote of the day segment. Here is a quote I hold dear. I will share it now. True knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing. That, of course, is attributed to Socrates himself, though the exact wording is always a bit flexible in translation. I see it as a guiding principle, a reminder that our certainty can hinder our growth if we cling too tightly to it. In my own words, I think this quote means that the moment we think we have all the answers, we shut the door to discovery. If we can stay curious and humble, we continually remain open to new insights. Let me cap it off with a little personal joke. I once tried to convince my friend that I knew nothing, and she said, "Well, that explains your cooking." So, my dear listeners, how do you feel about today's famous quote? We are nearing the end of the show. If you have enjoyed our discussion, please do subscribe to our program, leave a like, or share your comments about whom you would like to see on future episodes. After all, we want to bring you the voices of fascinating historical figures from around the globe and across time. Remember, if you were preoccupied and missed anything, you can always replay this interview. We are also a podcast, so you can find us on multiple platforms. If you are studying a new language, you might find our episodes in that language helpful for your learning. I personally like to replay episodes when I get lonely, or sometimes they help me drift off to sleep. It is all in the show notes, so make sure to check out the links there. You know, I once tried listening to my own voice as a lullaby, and I ended up dreaming about togas again. As for our next guest, I will not give away the name, but trust me, it is another legend you will not want to miss. So stay tuned. This is Lily, and I hope you will join us again for more enlightening conversations here on Background Interview. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, life is full of wonder if you know where to look for it. Farewell for now, everyone. Oh my, I cannot wait to see you next time.